Greg Nuckols is someone who most fitness professionals would have heard of, and if you're a fitness enthusiast, you can find more about him by looking at gregnuckols.com. You can look for him on Facebook and Instagram. You can find him at Stronger by Science, and he is part of the team that does the mass research review. Him and Eric Trexler co-host a podcast of their own, of which they have fireside chats, and that is kind of what I modeled this episode after. So if you're looking for the technical stuff that Greg is known for dissecting and being able to articulate, this is not the podcast for that. It's not that it doesn't have value, but I wanted to provide a little bit of something that kind of gives you more of an idea of Greg as just a person. And it's just like a casual conversation that bounces back and forth all over the place. We go from one topic to a completely different topic at the tip of a hat. And I just enjoyed the conversation. A crazy piece of context is, while him and I are basically the same age, totally different people. And that's kind of the cool thing about what happens, like when each person has different abilities. When they just lean into their own specific ability and then refer out when needed, you're able to go leaps and bounds in your direction of choice. So where he is good at reading research and writing papers, I like to do silly jokes and talk to myself on podcasts. But no, in all seriousness, I hope that you enjoy this one. Be sure to share it with a friend, and here we go. Welcome to The Lifestyle Chase, Season 2. This podcast features high performers who have found a way to live their best life while balancing their health, wellness, friends, and family. I'm your host, Chris Little. Let's get started. The Lifestyle Chase is brought to you by Yeg Fitness. Yeg Fitness is Edmonton, Alberta, Canada's healthy lifestyle community, creating and supporting active living for all. Check them out online at yegfitness.ca and on social media at yegfitness. So, welcome to episode 115 of The Lifestyle Chase. I am joined by the ever so friendly Greg Nuckols. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. So I'm going to give my audience a little bit of a backstory as to how I kind of came across you. Like, I've obviously heard about you on several podcasts, read articles, all kinds of different things. You're a very well-known person within the trainer community for sure. But I had the opportunity to go to Kansas City last year to see you present, and then I got to see you present again in Edmonton, and it's just super cool just how personable leaders in the fitness industry can be. Like, I think a lot of people can get intimidated when somebody puts a lot of effort into their body of work, but you're just as human as anybody else. And I enjoyed watching on your Instagram story all the cooking that you were doing. So tell me a little bit more about the cooking.
Well, okay, so you said before we started recording that I could go on tangents. So before I answer your first question, I'm going to go on a tangent. So, dude, like, yeah, I think a lot of people who are like just getting into the fitness space are like way more intimidated by like quote unquote leaders in our space than they should be, for a couple of reasons. One, most people are, can I swear?
Yeah.
Because I was about to. Okay, most people are chill as fuck. Like, so it wasn't that long ago that, like, you know, I was just some kid. I was still in college, or like had just graduated from college. No one knew who I was. And I would like go to events and meet people who I'd looked up to for a long time. And I was initially intimidated by that. And then, you know, I'd just like go try to talk to them. And like 90+% of the time, they were all super cool and chill. So yeah, like my perception of most people in our space being chill isn't just because like we're peers and I'm buddies with them now. Like even before they had any reason to care who I was, they were chill as fuck. So one, don't be intimidated for that reason. Like you go try to meet someone, chat with them, they're probably going to be pretty cool. Secondly, if someone does like have a huge ego and feel like they're too big for their britches to talk to you, dude, like, fuck them. Because the thing is, like, dude, in a space like, you know, if you wanted to go, so I was in an airport a while back and couldn't walk by. And I've heard from a lot of people that Scottie Pippen's an asshole. I don't know if that's true or not. Very well might not be. I'm not trying to slander Scottie Pippen right now. But the thing is, like, he's Scottie fucking Pippen. Like, there's millions and millions of people who know who he is. Like, there's probably thousands of people, like, a piece of his time. If he's like an asshole to like random people who try to like stop him and say like, hey, can I get an autograph in an airport or something like that, he kind of has license to be like that, because if he gave a bit of his time to everyone who wanted it, he'd probably have no time for anything. But like, dude, no one, at least in like our side of the fitness space, like the quote unquote evidence-based fitness space, no one's that fucking big. So like, if anyone's too big for their britches, they're just fucking delusional. So yeah, fuck them. Anyway, all of which is to say, most people are fairly chill. You asked about food. What was the specific question again?
So essentially, in reference to what you were creating yesterday, I can't say that I remember exactly what it was, but I just kind of want to know, like, why, because you are big into cooking. You are a food connoisseur, as it were. Why do you cook the food that you cook, and what do you enjoy most about it?
Oh, yeah. So this probably isn't the answer you're expecting. I like to cook. I think it's just generally fun and zen. I'm also pretty lazy about anything that's not either like work or training. So like, I mostly cook to like do something nice for my friends or to make my wife happy. When I'm not having friends coming over and when my wife's out of town, and just for like my own meals that I'm not cooking for anyone else, I prep ahead mass amounts of very boring food, and so that's like most of my meals. Or like if my wife's out of town, I'll just like get Uber Eats like 4 times a day. Well, I don't eat 4 times a day, like 2 or 3 times a day. So yeah, I mean, it's mostly something that I do enjoy doing that other people like, and that's the main reason I do it. I don't really go out of the way to cook for myself very much, but yeah, it's a fun little thing.
That's fair. So we got to do a bit of an icebreaker, because some of my audience is just going to be fitness enthusiasts and they may never have heard of you. How would you introduce yourself? What would your icebreaker be at the party if, say, somebody was like, hey man, what do you do?
So it would kind of depend how old they are.
Let's say they're between like 25 and 35 and mostly female, like 70% female.
Oh, yeah. So anyone who's under like 40 or 50, I can say I mostly work online. I train clients, write, put out products. Like, and I think most people under like 40, 45 kind of understand how online commerce works. Something I've ran into with like my parents and my wife's parents and like older people in my family is I think they all think I'm a drug dealer, because and so I'm not trying to be ageist here. Like, there are certainly middle-aged and older people who do understand how commerce on the internet works, but a lot of them don't. And I try to explain what I do, and they get very confused and like very skeptical, where it's like, well, I can tell you're making a decent living, but I really don't understand how you're doing so. There must be something sketchy going on. But yeah, like 25 to 35 years old, I put out fitness content on the internet and coach people.
Sweet. So let's take a time machine back 10 years. What was life like for you 10 years ago?
How old am I? 28. So I would be about to graduate high school right now. That's crazy. Jeez. Time fucking flies. Yeah, so I would be finishing up senior year of high school. I had a girlfriend. We're now married, so that turned out better than the odds would suggest that it would have. Let's see. Had a summer job lined up, planning on going to college. Did in fact go to college. Don't want to make it sound like I had that plan and it fell through. But yeah, just high school stuff.
So, like, was your path always to kind of get into this fitness space, or did you have any other ideas?
No, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I'm not a planner anyways. Like, I don't make long-term plans. So I was going to college. I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do with my life. Like, I didn't have a dream career or anything like that. My favorite subject in high school was history. And so I was like, well, I figure I'm supposed to go to college. That's like a thing people do. I don't really know what I want to do with my life, but I know I enjoy learning about history. So I'll be a history major. So I went to college as a history major. Still did not think at all about my future going through college. Got to the senior capstone class for history, and as part of that, we there were big writing projects and whatnot. So most of the work for that class took place outside the classroom. We had to write very big research papers with tight timelines. But within each class session itself, we just sit around in a room for, I believe those class periods were 2.5 hours, and mostly talk about what we were going to do after graduation. So, what kind of jobs can you get with an undergraduate degree in history? What kind of jobs can you get with a graduate degree in history? What grad school for history is like? And by the fourth class period, I was like, Jesus Christ, I don't want any of these jobs. I don't actually want anything that I could possibly do with this degree that I'm about to get. And so, I had been really into lifting for a while at that point. So, in around the end of the fourth class period of senior seminar, I was like, okay, this isn't working. So I went straight from class to the registrar's office and said, I want to change my my major classification from history to exercise science. And so I did that, and then I embarked on a whole new degree program when I was 2 classes away from finishing history. So yeah, that's kind of what got me. I mean, falling in love with the iron in the first place is initially what got me going down this path. But that's what got me going down this path professionally.
So something that kind of stood out to me in my impression of you, I've always had the impression that you're a hardworking person, but what really resonated was we were sitting around having lunch in Kansas City, basically the whole group of attendees just about, and I could hear you talking about how you basically ran on no sleep to get some of your papers done, and it's just how does he do it? And it's just you were living a skeleton life in the sense of work-life balance. It was work and just whatever you had to do to survive, and then back to work again, whether it came to your education, etc. What goes through your head that keeps you on track in doing that? What sustains you in being able to keep that up without dying?
I mean, that's a good question to which I don't have a good answer. So it was partially, I don't want to say necessity, because that makes it sound too dire. Because the thing is, if I just dropped out, so I was in grad school at the time. I haven't been an undergrad for the last 8 years. But yeah, it wasn't necessarily necessity, because I had been doing fine prior to going to grad school. If I dropped out of grad school, everything still would have been fine. So I can't necessarily say it's a necessity. And a lot of the work was by trying to like keep the businesses running, like humming along similarly to how they were prior to going to grad school. And I very well could have put some stuff on the back burner. So it wasn't necessarily necessity from that standpoint either. But I feel like, I don't know. I feel almost like a sense of obligation to maintain my work output. And I don't know. I feel like I'm just kind of hardwired to be driven by duty, I guess. And so if I tell someone I'm going to do something, or if I set an expectation that I will be getting, XYZ done, then I do it. And the cost of getting it done doesn't really even cross my mind. So yeah, rationally in hindsight, I could have been doing less and taking things quite a bit easier. I mean, even like my thesis project, like I could have definitely picked and designed a much easier, less labor intensive thesis project. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to do good work. And so Trex and I actually talked about this on a recent fireside chat on our podcast. I think I'm kind of a workaholic, but like I don't think that's necessarily true in like the general connotation of the term, of like maybe you don't necessarily love work, but you're caught on like the lifestyle treadmill and you feel like you have to work extra hours and work a bunch of overtime to like maintain a particular lifestyle or whatever it is. More than anything, I just love what I do, and so I don't find it hard to put in long hours. Like the sleep deprivation definitely wasn't particularly fun, but it was one of those things where like it sucked enormous amounts of ass to drag myself out of bed every day. And I didn't feel particularly good until I got enough stimulants in my system. But then once I got enough stimulants in my system and I was in the lab and I was collecting data, and then I'd get done and like get to work on other stuff, like I genuinely enjoyed all of that. So, once I actually got going in the morning, it wasn't particularly hard to keep myself going.
That's awesome. Something that I like about what you said there is just like, it's tough to kind of get up in the morning, but then once you got like your caffeine or whatever you needed, then you got into like your routine. So for people that are listening now and their routine's kind of askew, what are 3 things that kind of stand out for you in being able to maintain like that flow of being able to work? Like, what are, aside from caffeine, what are 3 things that you need?
I can narrow it down to 1. A stable internet connection.
That's pretty clear cut.
Like, I'm a low main, as long as
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little choppy. Just maybe it'll fix itself in a bit here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Checking my connection real quick.
Now we're good. We're good now.
Pretty good on my end.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, as long as I'm at least above the first layer of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like as long as I have food, water, shelter, and then I'm not really sure where stimulants fall on Maslow's hierarchy, but as long as I have that as well, plus a stable internet connection, like I'm good to go.
So are you energy drinks or coffee? Oh.
Actually, one other thing I'll add, I guess, is this may be coming across by just how much I'm talking, but I'm what one might describe as borderline pathologically extroverted. So on like a day-to-day basis, I don't like need that much human contact. But at least like a couple times a week, I need to do social things, or I start slowly going crazy. So that's also pretty important for me.
Well, that's very realistic. I mean, like, I think a lot of people are learning what they are in a time when the options are kind of like, we've got walls on either side of us, like sometimes literally when we are self-isolating. And it's just the introverts are learning that they're introverts and the extroverts are learning that they're extroverts, and everything in between. They're figuring that out because there's no more muddy water. It's very black and white. It's like we're either lining up our video calls or like yelling at people across the field, or we are not, and we're realizing like our outcomes are changing a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to caffeine, energy drinks or coffee, and why?
I mean, either and or both. So actually, recently I've been drinking a lot of tea, and I think the reason for that is I generally do just an absolute dog shit job of staying hydrated. And so what I'll do is I'll make like half a gallon of tea. You're Canadian, right? So like 2 liters of tea.
Yeah.
Actually, do you guys use imperial or metric for?
Like, we use liters, so yeah.
That's what I call it. So yeah, around 2 liters of tea. I make it the night before, and it's like, I mean, I make it strong, so it's comparable in caffeine content to about 2 to 3 large cups of coffee. But there's obviously a lot more liquid. So that's what I've been starting my day with more often. Again, because it has about as much caffeine as I want in my first hour of the day. But if I drink 2 liters of fluid in the first hour of the day, then I'm starting the day much more hydrated. So yeah, been drinking a lot of tea recently. And then like that's not going to be anywhere close to my full caffeine content for the day. So in terms of whether I go for coffee or an energy drink next, really just depends on the kind of mood I'm in. We always have plenty of both around the Nuckols house. So yeah, it seems to be that if I'm consuming my next caffeine with lunch, then I'll make coffee to go with lunch. Or if I need caffeine before lunch, then I just run down to the fridge and grab an energy drink. So yeah, it's more like a convenience thing than anything else.
Have you ever encountered a time when like you had too much caffeine and you had to back off, or are you able to maintain a fairly steady influx? Yeah,
so there's a particular gene. It's called your CYP1A2 gene, and it codes for the protein that is the rate-limiting factor in metabolizing caffeine. That's not particularly important, but the genotype you have for that particular gene affects rate of caffeine metabolism, and an offshoot of that is it seems to be associated with whether or not you experience negative psychological effects from caffeine. So, whether or not you get really jittery, whether or not you get really like nervous. Like I've heard of people getting like legit paranoid if they consume too much caffeine. I've never been gene tested, but I strongly assume that I have the fast metabolizer type of like the fast metabolizing version of the CYP1A2 gene, because I've never gotten bad vibes off of caffeine, and I've gone through periods where I consumed just ridiculous amounts of caffeine. But yeah, like, so if the worst experience I've ever had from caffeine is like if I haven't been needing to consume much, and then big deadlines coming up, I need to pull an all-nighter, and I drink a ton of caffeine in the process. like I might get like a very, very slight hand tremor, like very, very slight. It doesn't affect anything I do. But that's it. Like none of the actual like bad psychological effects. So yeah, I'm fairly lucky in that regard. And I also seem to be fairly lucky because I think I don't experience as bad of withdrawal effects as some people. So, I mean, I never go completely without caffeine, but like on the weekends, if I do take a day easy, I'll get up in the morning and have just like 1 cup of coffee, and not like a big ass cup of coffee, but like 1 standard cup of coffee, and like I'm fine. I don't get headaches from it, or like from dramatically reducing caffeine intake. I don't feel like super lethargic. So yeah, like when I consume a lot of caffeine, I seem to get all of the good things you can get from caffeine. But I to this point, I haven't seemed to experience any major downsides either from consuming a lot or from withdrawals. So yeah, pretty fortunate in that regard.
I dig it. I'm definitely someone where like I can have a lot of caffeine, but I definitely see the line where I have too much. So it's kind of interesting that you have like an explanation for it. Like I would have never thought. I was just like, oh, there's probably a line for everybody. Nobody has like the lack of a line. But I want to dive into a new topic here. So like to give my audience some perspective, how many presentations would you say you do per year?
Not many. Maybe like 3 or 4.
Okay. And then what kind of regions do you cover? Would you say it's just North America? Does it go outside of North America? Is it one country, multiple countries? Like I kind of know the answer, but I'm interested to hear it from your voice.
Let's see. As Pitbull would say, you can call me Mr. Worldwide. That came off way douchier than I
It's all good.
So there are 2 events that I really love that I do every year. One is the Fitness Summit in Kansas City. The other one is European Powerlifting Conference. It kind of goes back and forth between various places in Ireland, and then last year it was in England. And I guess the Kansas City Summit's going to be off the table now. This was supposed to be the last year. I don't know if they're rescheduling. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, those are marked on my calendar ahead of time. If they're going to keep inviting me back to speak, I'm going to go, and I'd probably go even if they didn't invite me to speak, just because I really like the events. And then, yeah, I like travel in the abstract, but I don't like traveling a lot. So beyond that, I'll pick like 2 or maybe 3 other events. Try to at least have like a good 2 to ideally 3 months between them. And yeah, for the other things I agree to, I try to make them places I've never been before. So let's see, I've done a few in Asia, I've done a few in Europe. I had something lined up in Latin America, but coronavirus happened. Let's see, made it up to Edmonton. That's basically an entire different land. It's north of the wall, if you will. I've done a couple things in Toronto. So yeah, haven't made it to Africa yet. And I guess this isn't Africa, but it's relatively close. There was a thing in Israel that also fell through because of the coronavirus. But yeah, I get all around. I don't necessarily have a problem with doing things in the U.S., but if someone invites me out, ideally it's going to be someplace I've never been before. So I was going to do the Spokane one this year. Also fell through because of the coronavirus. But yeah, I've never been out to the Pacific Northwest. I'd like it out. Always down to visit SoCal again. Not crazy about LA, but I love the entire rest of Southern California. I don't know. I just go here and there. I say no to more events than I say yes to. Again, just because like I like the travel I do, but I don't want to do it all the time. It just takes a lot out of me and throws off my work schedule a lot.
So when it comes to things that you like doing, aside from travel, aside from research, what are things in addition to those things that you prioritize, that you implement in your life?
Like nothing. I'm a pretty boring dude, man. Like I work a lot. If I'm not working, I'm generally either cooking or spending time with friends or my wife. Yeah, that's about it. I don't know. I don't do much.
And that's an okay answer. Like, honestly, you got to pay to play. So for you put out such a large volume of material. In order for somebody to create that much material, they have to be invested in that. And so, like, for myself, somebody asks me, oh, what do you do for fun? I'm like, well, I record a lot of podcasts. And in order to have a lot of podcasts, you need to set aside the time to record a lot of podcasts. And so I'm not going to be the one that's out at the patio like every weekend, because half the time I'm editing a podcast. And so that makes sense. And then it gets someone who sees kind of where you are at in your career, gets them to sort of understand, okay, like if I want to be doing the exact same thing as him, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to have to work pretty hard.
Well, so here's the deal. Here's one of the reasons I think I don't have many hobbies. So just the way I'm wired, if I'm going to do something and I'm going to find it like intrinsically motivating, like I don't have to like force myself to do it. Like just for the fun of it, I'm going to come back to it over and over and over again. The only thing that I really find intrinsically motivating is the development of mastery of something, and that's a time process, and I just don't have that much time in the day. So I put a lot of effort into my work, and I think the reason I find it so rewarding is because I think I'm quite good at it, and it's also something that I can improve at. And as long as I'm improving and learning new things, getting better at interpreting research, I think that's legitimately fun. Like I enjoy doing it. That takes a lot of time, so I don't have time for like a bunch of other hobbies. My main hobby is cooking, and that's another thing where, like, you may not know this, there's a lot of things that someone can cook, like there's a lot of different cooking skills. And so to develop mastery of all of those skills, like, and I'm not trying to claim that I'm like chef level good. That would be absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I'm an enthusiastic home cook at best, but that's something that also takes a reasonable amount of time and effort to continually improve my skills and get better at. So yeah, that's something else that I find very intrinsically motivating, because if I, make a dish twice and it's substantially better the second time, I'm like, hell yeah, this feels good. Like, let's keep doing this. But then, like, after those things, there's just not that much time left in the day. And I just don't think I have time to get good at a third thing, like get really, really good at it. And so it necessarily makes whatever else I do less fun and rewarding. So before I got really into cooking, I played classical guitar, and I was never like super good at it, but I got reasonably decent. And I keep thinking, like, I would love to pick classical guitar back up. But I know that, like, to do that, I'd have to cook less, because I don't have enough time for a third hobby, and I wouldn't have fun just like kind of messing around a guitar but sucking, like that. I just wouldn't be capable of enjoying that. So yeah, due to what I need to do to find something intrinsically rewarding, I simply can't do that many things.
That like spells it out so clearly, because like I can apply that to things going on my plate and think, oh wow, like that's probably why I'm not succeeding as much as I want to in this thing, because I'm just like spreading myself too thin. But in saying that, putting it back to you, how do you make your decisions as to, like, let's use your podcast as an example. Like, how long have you had your podcast running with Eric Trexler?
Do what?
How long have you had your podcast going for?
I think our first episode came out approximately a year ago, thereabouts.
And so
early May. I don't know. It's around a year old.
What kind of motivated like the start of the podcast? What kind of got the ball rolling? Like, okay, I have the bandwidth to really master a podcast.
So it wasn't that thought process. So one thing that I do pretty religiously is try to maintain division of labor. So there's stuff that I do that I'm good at. Our business is 3 people. It's me, my wife Lindsay, and Eric Trexler. There's stuff that Eric does that he's good at, and there's stuff that Lindsay does that she's really good at. And I think that for all of those pieces to integrate, we all need to have like just a base level understanding of what each of us is doing. But I don't. It would be a waste of time for me to master skills that Eric has already mastered, or to master skills that Lindsay's already mastered. Like there's a need to have some degree of overlapping skill sets, just so when we have meetings, we're not talking past each other. But there's no need for all of us to master the skills that someone else has already mastered. And so the podcast is primarily Eric's thing. In terms of like the time and effort that goes into each episode, it's probably like 80-20 or like 70-30 him me. So it's just fundamentally not something that I am specifically out there like spending bandwidth and trying to master. Like that's something he's doing. And then in terms of like the purpose of the podcast and the reason we decided to do it is we wanted to have an avenue to connect with our audience in a different way. And 2, we wanted a way to get content out more frequently that basically doesn't take as much work per unit of content. So for writing, both me and Eric, like if we write something, we generally want it to be something like long form and pretty comprehensive. And that takes a lot of reading, that takes a lot of research, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort. And so we just can't get written content out that frequently without dropping our standards or like completely changing our written content strategy. So, I mean, like realistically, an article might be 30, 40, 50 hours of work. A podcast doesn't fucking take 30 hours of work, you know? Like we can interview some people, we can read just like a handful of studies and do a little like research rundown. We can share hot takes. For the fireside chats, it's just like people propose, topics of conversation, and we just hop on the mic and talk about it with literally no prep work whatsoever. So the total time investment for a fireside chat is literally just the time it takes to record it. So it helps us get content out way more frequently than we'd be able to otherwise. And like I said, it helps us connect with our audience in a different way. So one of the motivators was like when I would go to events and whatnot and I would meet people, one of the big pieces of feedback I'd always get is, you are nothing like I expected you to be. Because I don't know, like I'm reasonably high energy, I smile a lot, I like to crack jokes, and my writing is like very scientific, very dry, and I think there's at least like the cultural assumption that people who who write the kind of written content that I do are kind of like introverted or reserved, maybe not incredibly mirthful. And so just like the vibe that people get off of me from just interacting with me in text versus, either like listening to me talk or like having a conversation with me, completely different. And so, I realized like, oh, there's like, I have an audience, but like they don't know who I am at all, so it was partially to be able to actually like connect with my audience on a more personal level. And another motivator, which this isn't a major factor anymore, because I feel like people know who he is now. But when Eric came on, like dude went straight through school, like all the way from undergrad to PhD. So he'd like written some articles here and there on fitness sites, but he was largely kind of like an unknown quantity in the fitness space when we brought him on. And so like I wanted a way to get him in front of the audience in, relatively mass quantities. And I mean, I think Trex is hilarious. Like I love just shooting the shit with the guy. So I thought that like if we could get the podcast going and expose people to him and his personality as well, that would also be good for like helping to integrate him into the business. So that was the thought process behind it.
I like it. And just the whole division of labor concept, I think that it's underutilized in a lot of people's lives. Like I was talking to Dean Guido this morning, and we talk about our respective podcasts, and we kind of talk about what we're working on, our websites, and anything that we're kind of like on the same page for. And it's just how like sometimes if you're like, for me, if I'm not so good at creating like something that describes me and what I sell, then I should get someone who's good at describing what I sell. Like maybe I'm not a salesy person. Maybe I just like the one-on-one connection. And so I find other people, and we talked about like exchanging of services. So like for me, I'm still pretty new in my personal training career. I'm 2 years in, so I'm not going to be able to invest in like really expensive help, but I have skills that I can help other people with. And one of the examples that I used with Dean was just like, I'm proficient at video editing, and there's a lot of trainers who aren't. And so it's just kind of cool to see you in where you're at, being able to outline that like, hey, like we don't all have to be equally good at everything, because that's kind of pointless. But to have like a team where we can each kind of divide and conquer is pretty effective in making progress.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So the next thing that I want to talk to you about is something that stood out to me in just that it's kind of handy to have some funny stories. And that's sort of like something that I use in most of my interactions. I'll start talking to somebody and I'll be like, do you have any funny stories from the last week? So I'm curious, in all of the entire year 2019, what is like one funny story that you just can't get out of your head? Like something that you are just excited to talk about?
Oh man. So there are a lot coming to mind, but a lot of them relate to people who at least someone listening to this podcast would probably know. So I probably shouldn't tell them. I don't know. Let's table that.
Oh yeah.
I'm fairly decent at going on tangents. So like if a funny story comes to mind as I'm answering another question, I'll launch into it.
100%. I want to know a little bit more about, because I was listening to the fireside. Oh,
here's a kind of funny story.
I'm ready.
So this was from like a month ago, maybe. No, less than that. So when Trex and I started the Fireside Chat series, we wanted it to be, fun, light audio content. It'd be like just a conversation between buddies about random subjects, just for people to put on in the background and just just vibe with while they're going about their day. Just something to take their mind off of all the shit going on in the world right now. And so, we wanted it to be fun and light. And we, when we started recording, I believe it was the third fireside chat. For whatever reason, we were just both in a mood that day. Like, maybe our caffeine levels weren't optimal. Maybe we were just like sleep deprived. I don't know. We were just like in a weird, like kind of dark mood. Not like depressed mood, but like my standard sense of humor is like pretty dark, and my tolerance, so like my level of what I will personally find like off-putting and offensive is pretty high. So I'll occasionally say stuff that like I think is just fucking funny, that people are like, holy shit, Greg, what did you just say? So anyway, I need to like tone that down a little bit for the fireside chats. So we started recording one, and we were like talking about summer jobs, or like, what jobs we had other than like fitness related things. And I talked about how I was a summer camp counselor for the YMCA. And, I had some stories about that. Like, kids are ridiculous. This wasn't the YMCA camp. I was also a summer camp counselor for like the local rec department. And the kids in my group were like 7 to 9 years old. And like, I caught a kid selling weed. I was like, dude, you're like fucking 8. You can't be doing this shit. Because, I mean, I don't know if you're aware of what's still going on down in the States. That's like still kind of frowned upon, the whole marijuana thing. Anyway, so it wasn't that summer camp. It was the Y. And so the kids went swimming every day. And so we didn't have to, do like a full lifeguard test or anything like that. But we had to take like a pool safety like module in our training, so that we'd be able to like, look after the kids in the pool and like make sure no one drowned. And as part of that training, we were forced to watch a video of like a crowded pool, and like it's grainy ass CCTV footage. And like, it's like, watch this video. There's a child who drowns. See if you can pick him out. And that was like one of the things we had to do. Like, because apparently drowning doesn't look the way it looks in the movies. There aren't people like flailing around at the surface of the water for like 30 seconds before they sink under. They just like fucking sink under and die. And so it's like, watch this crowded pool and see if you can notice the child who starts to drown. And so like, I'm watching this thing, and like, there's a shit ton of people and there's a lot of activity and it's terrible footage. And like, I don't see the kid that drowns. And I promise this is funny. Like, the funny part's coming up, and it's kind of like hee funny, not ha funny, but like, it'll be fine. Anyway, so didn't see the kid, and then it's like, let's rewind, and I'll circle the kid who fucking drowns, and let's watch it back. And then it like zooms in, and it's like a 2-minute long video. Like, it's uncomfortably long, and you just like watch it, and you're like, oh, that is a child drowning. And so then like the entire summer when we would go to the pool, and like, I'm not a strong swimmer in the first place. Like, I'm a quite poor swimmer. I can doggy paddle with the best of them, but like, that's about it. And so I was just butthole puckered. Like, I was like, I'm gonna let a kid drown. It like, probably 20% of my kids are going to drown before the summer's over. Like, I was fucking scared. Anyway, so I told that story on a fireside chat, and we got done. We stopped recording, and like, there were a couple other dark things that came up during the recording as well. And Trex and I both looked at each other, and we were like, we probably can't run that because, that's not like good vibes listening, right? And so now before we start every fireside chat recording, we do a little chant. We're like, "No dead kids, no dead kids." And like, if anyone just walked in on us, they'd be like, "What the fuck are these guys doing?" But that's kind of like how we amp ourselves up to record fireside chats now. We just sit behind our mics and we're like, "Okay, we're gonna click record in 3, 2, 1." We click record. No dead kids, no dead kids. Welcome back to the Stronger by Science Fireside Chat series. I'm your host, Greg Nuckols. So anyway, next time you listen to a fireside chat, just know that we chanted "No Dead Kids" for about 15 seconds before we hit record, and it's worked. We've recorded another 4 episodes past that point. So far, haven't talked about dead kids even once.
Nicely done. Well, I mean, like, that gives some backstory that I wouldn't have known otherwise. It was kind of cool because I used to be a camp counselor. I did it for 4 summers, and I can totally understand. It's like, I don't swim very good, and I wouldn't necessarily be the first one to identify the situation, and I'd be a little bit nervous. But, like, I mean, that's why I don't apply to be the lifeguard at the place, and somebody else handles that stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
So then my next question for you is, if you were going to give one piece of advice on how someone could live their life as themselves authentically to the fullest, what would that piece of advice be?
I don't know, dude. Like, what does it mean to live an authentic life? So I don't even know that I have a robust concept of the self. Like, if someone asked me who I am, I could tell you like some things that I do, but I wouldn't be able to answer, like, you know, on a deep, like, metaphysical level, who is Greg. So I don't even know what the fuck it would mean for, like, me to live an authentic versus inauthentic life. And this is actually something Trex and I discussed yesterday on the fireside chat that we recorded yesterday. We talked about the philosophical concept of determinism, and I'm not like a hardcore devoted determinist. Like, you know, it's not something that I've spent like dozens of hours researching, and I can't conceive of anything else being true. But like, in the reading I've done on the subject, determinism seems fairly compelling. And if nothing else, as someone who's not planning on investing an enormous amount of time reading about it, I think it's at least a good null hypothesis. Like, all of the other physical systems we've studied seem to be deterministic. Like, we can predict their behavior via, you know, the laws of physics and knowing their initial states. And so I can't think of a fundamental reason why human brains would be different. So an implication of determinism is that free will doesn't exist, which takes a second to wrap your head around. So I don't know that anyone is capable of living a life other than an authentic life, because I don't actually know that choices exist in the first place. And so, you know, people are just fucking basically doing what they were always going to do. And they just have varying senses of control about the whole thing. But yeah, I don't think it's possible to live a life other than, depending how you view it, either a 100% authentic life or a 100% inauthentic life. Just depending how you want to interpret lack of free will. So yeah, I feel like that's probably not the answer to that question you were expecting, but it's the best answer I got.
Honestly, it's kind of funny because, like, I know my guest enough that I'm like, okay, now when one person is going to answer this question, they're probably going to answer it very simply. And when another person is going to answer this question, I might need to block out some time for them to be able to answer it. And that is what I did in this instance. And you gave me the perfect answer because it was it was your answer. Like, what, like, it's kind of all about perspective. Like, either a person's going to give you somebody else's answer, or they're going to give you their answer, and that being your answer, I could totally put Coldplay behind that and make it sound inspiring in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, fuck that.
So if it came down to it, what music would be your, like, theme music? What's kind of the stuff that goes in the background in your head when you're going about your day to day?
I mean, I can tell you what's going in my ears on a day to day.
Sure.
So I get distracted really easily if I'm not being stimulated enough. And so I need to have music going when I work to be able to focus. But if, or I can like work in a coffee shop, just like background noise is fine too. But I get distracted if there's lyrics. And so are you acquainted with the genre of music known as synthwave?
Not enough to be able to talk about it, but I'm sure I've heard a bit of it.
It's kind of like the music you would expect in just like an intro sequence and just kind of like a chill 80s movie, I guess. Yeah, I have a synthwave playlist that's like fucking 400 hours long on Spotify. And so, yeah, that's just what I listen to when I work. It is neither my favorite nor least favorite genre of music. Like, I think it's good for just like setting a nice chill vibe. Have you seen the movie Tron?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so the Tron soundtrack isn't strictly synthwave, but it's synthwave-esque. So it's kind of like that feel. Yeah, so I listen to a shit ton of synthwave just because it helps me focus. When I'm listening to music to listen to music, my music tastes are fairly eclectic. So I think my favorite bands since I was like 11 years old were Rise Against, Anberlin, Yellow Card, and Silverstein. But I still listen to a fair amount of them. But I listen to a fair amount of hip hop. So these days I'm really into Freddie Gibbs and Brother Ali. I listen to a lot of Rage Against the Machine when I lift. It's prime lifting music in my opinion. I like a lot of just like general pop, especially kind of like electronic pop. So Borns and Churches are two of my favorite artists these days. Yeah, it's kind of all over the place.
That's awesome, though. I mean, like, I can relate to a lot of those music selections, and I'd have to say, like, I agree with you. When I'm working on stuff, lyrics distract me. Sometimes I'll dive into like I've tried whale music before. Have you tried whale music?
No.
You should give it a shot. It might do some wonders for you. But it's like I'm going to experiment with all the different music that's out there, whether it's instrumentals or electronic or synthwave or some whale noises or maybe some beach music or certain frequencies, because you don't know unless you know.
Mm-hmm. So do you want to hear something that's simultaneously like cool and kind of depressing about whales?
Oh, I'm ready.
So whales communicate via whale song, and it travels through the ocean so much better than speech travels through air because it's denser, so like it transmits the sound waves more efficiently. And so whales can talk to each other over hundreds of miles. And there are a lot of whale species that are endangered. In some of them, there's clear reasons why. So there's still a reasonable amount of illegal whale hunting that goes on in the Pacific. Not really in the Atlantic, at least to the best of my knowledge. Some whales are at risk because like the fish that they traditionally eat are being like overfished and like their food supplies are threatened. But there are also some species of whale that, like, you know, on the surface, it seems like everything should generally be fine. Like they're not being hunted. Their food supply seems generally okay, but their numbers are dwindling. They're not breeding at the rates one would expect them to. And people are kind of like, what's going on here? Like, what's wrong with these whales? And one piece of evidence related to that emerged after 9/11. So after 9/11, the world just kind of ground to a stop for a hot second, because folks were like, what's going to come next? Like, are they going to hijack, ships that are like carrying supplies? Are they going to hijack more airplanes? Like, what's going on? So transatlantic travel and transoceanic travel dropped dramatically. Shipping lanes closed. Like, everything was just kind of put on hold for at least a little bit, so people could figure out, like, is another shoe going to drop? And like during that time period, whale song dramatically increased, and according to whale researchers, became much happier. I don't know how one would assess the general vibes of a whale song, but according to them, like, they were more like joyful whale songs, and whales started fucking a lot more. So the hypothesis born from that is essentially that, like, these big ocean liners that are, carrying freight across the ocean are quite loud. Their engines and propellers are, putting a lot of waves out there in the ocean, and that's like interrupting whale song. And so it makes the whales feel isolated and depressed, because they kind of evolved to be able to communicate with each other over hundreds and hundreds of miles. And all of the transatlantic shipping lanes, it's kind of like if you were trying to chat with someone over AIM, but they had like a really shitty connect. That dates me. You're trying to Skype with someone, but they have a really bad connection, and like, you can never connect with them anymore. So it's kind of like that whole idea. So basically the concept that, like, the modern world is making whales depressed because it's like socially isolating them. Anyway, that's kind of a bummer of a story, but yeah, I could see whale songs being good to listen to while you work.
What a segue. Just like, oh yeah, whale songs. Well, let me tell you something that will make you sad every time you hear whale songs.
Every fucking whale song you've listened to is just like a cry for help.
Yeah. Damn it, man. Now I'm not going to be productive at all. But to wrap things up, I'd like to thank you for joining me today. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to definitely pick out obviously link up your stuff, but then pick out some of your stuff that would be helpful to people during this time. And it's easy because there's so much of it. And so I'll be able to kind of match that up with my audience, whether it be a few articles or specific podcast episodes. Are there any parting words that you would like to leave with my audience today?
Not really.
That's awesome. Well, thank you.
No, I'm not one for words of wisdom.
That's all good. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Greg. We talked about so many different things that it's hard to nail it down to just one. But your episode challenge for today is I want you to really dial it in on one thing. Just go full on horse blinders on one specific thing and tell me what it's going to be. Even if it's just for a week, maybe it's just for a day. What's that thing going to be? Are you going to play guitar? Are you going to read research? Are you going to improve a technique in your workouts? What's it going to be? Put that in the comments on the page at The Lifestyle Chase on Instagram. There'll be a post that says your episode challenge. And be sure to check out past episodes of The Lifestyle Chase by going to thelifestylechase.podbean.com. My name is Chris Little. If we haven't met yet, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.